Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person? And if you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button. It was a quiet afternoon in a small town. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting golden light over the empty sidewalks. The wind was soft, gently rustling the trees, and the streets were mostly still. The only sounds were birds chirping and the occasional car passing by. Emily Carter walked carefully, holding onto the harness of her guide dog, Shadow. He was a big, strong black Labrador with sharp eyes and quick movements. Shadow was more than just a pet, he was her protector, her helper, and her best friend. He never left her side. Emily had been blind since she was a little girl. She couldn't see the world the way others did, but she had learned to navigate it in her own way. She had excellent hearing, and she could sense things others often missed. She could tell when someone was near, even before they spoke. She could hear footsteps from far away, and she could even tell when someone was staring at her. People often assumed Emily was weak. They thought she needed help all the time. Some were kind, offering to guide her across the street or help her find a seat. Others, though, were different. Some people thought being blind made her an easy target. But they were wrong. They had no idea who she really was. Emily had trained herself for years. She knew self-defense. She had learned to listen, to move fast, to react before others even realized what was happening. And, of course, there was Shadow. He wasn't just any guide dog. He had a past, a history no one could guess just by looking at him. Today, as Emily walked down the street, Shadow moved smoothly beside her, his paws making soft tapping sounds on the pavement. His ears twitched at every little noise, always alert. Emily could feel his muscles tense when someone walked by. He was always aware. Always ready. She turned the corner, heading toward the small coffee shop she liked. She knew the owner, Mrs. Thompson, who always greeted her with a warm voice and a fresh cup of tea. The shop wasn't far, just a few more steps. But then something changed. Emily didn't need to see to know when something was wrong. It was in the air. A feeling. A shift. The quiet street suddenly felt different. Shadow's body tensed slightly. His steps slowed, just for a second. Emily took a deep breath, listening carefully. She heard them before she could smell the faint scent of leather and gasoline. The low rumble of engines, the heavy boots scraping the ground, and the rough laughter of men who didn't sound friendly. Bikers. A group of them had stopped at the corner just ahead. There were at least 4 of them. She could tell from the way their voices overlapped, from the different weights of their footsteps. They were talking loudly, joking about something. Emily kept walking, keeping her head straight, her steps steady. She had been in situations like this before. Most of the time, people ignored her. But sometimes, people decided to test her. She hoped today wasn't one of those days. Shadow stayed close, his body pressed slightly against her leg. He felt it too. Then, the talking stopped. The laughter faded. Emily knew what that meant. She had caught their attention. One of them spoke up. His voice was deep and rough, like he had been smoking for years. "Hey, lady. Where ya headin'?" Emily didn't answer. She had learned long ago that responding to people like this could go 2 ways: either they left her alone, or they got worse. It was best to keep moving. She took another step forward. Another voice, younger, with a mocking tone, spoke up. "Ah, look at that, she's got a little doggy to protect her." The group laughed. Emily felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her face calm. She had heard worse before. Shadow let out a small, low growl. It was so quiet, only Emily could hear it. A warning. Emily gave a small tug on the harness. Stay calm, she thought. Shadow obeyed, but she could feel his energy shifting. He was watching them now, waiting. The sound of boots on pavement came closer. One of them had stepped into her path. She could hear the rustling of a leather jacket, the jingle of chains on his belt. "Come in now, don't be rude," he said, his voice fake and playful. "We're just trying to have a little fun." Emily stopped walking. She took a deep breath. Her fingers gripped the harness tighter. This was exactly the kind of moment she had trained for. The kind of moment where people underestimated her. Shadow didn't move. But she could feel his heartbeat steady, strong. He was waiting for her signal. Another voice, from behind her this time. "You need some help, sweetheart." Emily turned her head slightly in that direction, pretending she wasn't sure where he was. She knew exactly where he was. Just 2 steps away. Close enough for her to react if she needed to. "No, thank you," she said politely. The men laughed again. One of them took a step closer. She heard the shuffle of his boot. "You sure? You look a little lost." Emily's heartbeat remained steady. She wasn't scared. She was prepared. "I'm not lost," she said calmly. "I know exactly where I'm going." The leader, the one who had spoken first, chuckled. "Oh yeah? And where's that?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she shifted her feet slightly. Just enough to make sure she was balanced. Just enough to be ready if she had to act. Shadow's body was like a stone beside her. He didn't move a muscle, but Emily could feel his energy rising. He knew. The air was thick with tension. And Emily knew one thing for sure. They had just made a big mistake. No more laughter. No more mocking voices. Just the sound of the wind moving through the trees and the distant hum of passing cars. Emily stood still, gripping Shadow's harness, waiting. She didn't need to see the men's faces to know what they were thinking. She had been through this before. She knew their type. They saw a blind woman. A weak woman. Someone who wouldn't fight back. They had no idea how wrong they were. One of the bikers took another step forward. Emily could hear the heavy boots scuffing against the pavement. She could even smell the faint scent of motor oil on his jacket. "Why you so quiet?" he asked. "We're just talkin'." Another one chuckled. "Maybe she don't wanna talk. Maybe she's scared." Shadow's muscles tensed beneath her fingers. Emily gave a small squeeze on his harness, her silent signal for not yet. But the bikers weren't done. A new voice spoke up. This one was younger, a little cocky. "Or maybe she just needs a little help. Here, sweetheart, let me." Then, she felt it. A hand. Reaching. Grabbing for her arm. Instantly, Shadow exploded into action. Before the man's fingers could close around Emily's wrist, Shadow moved like lightning. His body snapped forward, placing himself between Emily and the biker. And then the growl. It was deep. Low. Powerful. The kind of growl that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The kind of growl that told you, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. The biker yanked his hand back like he had been burned. "Whoa. What the?" Shadow bared his teeth, his ears flat, his body tense like a coiled spring. His eyes locked onto the man in front of him, unblinking. A warning. A final chance. Emily turned her head slightly in the direction of the leader's voice. Her face was calm. Steady. "I told you," she said, her voice cool. "I know exactly where I'm going." The leader didn't laugh this time. He took a small step back. "Lady, you need to control your dog," he muttered, trying to sound tough but failing. Emily tilted her head slightly. "Do I?" The group was uneasy now. They weren't sure what to do. but one of them, either the bravest or the dumbest, still wasn't convinced. "Oh, come on," he scoffed. "It's just a dog." Emily smiled. "Is that what you think?" She let go of the harness. The moment Emily released Shadow's harness, everything changed. Because Shadow was not just a guide dog. He was not just a pet. He was not just any Labrador. Shadow had a past. A long time ago, before he became Emily's guide, Shadow had a different job. He had served in the Navy SEALs. He had trained in the toughest conditions. He had been on real missions. He had taken down threats that most people would never even dream of facing. And even though he was retired, Shadow had never forgotten his training. So when Emily let go of the harness, Shadow took action. Faster than the bikers could react, Shadow lunged. Not to bite. Not to hurt. But to control. He went straight for the leader, knocking him off balance in a flash of black fur and pure muscle. The man yelped, stumbling backward, hitting the pavement hard. The others froze. What the? Shadow didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood over the fallen man, his deep brown eyes locked onto him. Waiting. Watching. The leader didn't move. For the first time that day, he was silent. And then the moment of realization. One of the other bikers, probably the smartest of the group, gasped. "Wait a second. I know that dog." Emily's lips curled into a small smile. "Do you?" The biker's voice was shaky now. Yeah, I saw him before. There was this news story a few years back about a Navy SEAL canine who retired. They said he was one of the best. Trained for combat. Took down enemies twice his size." The color drained from the leader's face. "Oh, crap." Emily crossed her arms. "Still think he's just a dog?" No one spoke. Shadow remained still, waiting for Emily's next command. His body was tense, ready for anything. But he didn't have to do anything else. Because the bikers were already backing away. We didn't mean nothing by it," the leader stammered. "We were just messing around." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Messing around?" The leader swallowed hard. "Yeah. Just a joke, you know." Emily let the silence stretch. Then, she gave a small nod. "Then I suggest you leave. Now." Shadow let out one last, low growl. And that was all it took. The bikers scrambled. They rushed back to their motorcycles, their hands shaking as they fumbled with their helmets. Engines roared to life, and within seconds, they were gone, speeding down the road, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. Emily let out a small sigh. She reached down and gave Shadow a gentle pat on the head. "Good boy." Shadow wagged his tail. Emily picked up his harness again, feeling his solid presence beside her. And just like that, they continued their walk, calm, steady, as if nothing had happened. Because for them, this was just another day. Another reminder to the world. Never underestimate the wrong person. Emily walked peacefully down the sidewalk, the soft tapping of her cane and the steady rhythm of Shadow's paws filling the quiet street. The town was calm, just as she liked it. The sun was warm on her face, and the cool breeze felt refreshing. Shadow, her loyal guide dog, walked beside her with steady confidence. He was always alert, always watching. Even though Emily couldn't see, she could feel his energy. And right now, Shadow was relaxed. Nothing seemed wrong. At least, not yet. Then, a new sound broke the peace. A low, deep rumble in the distance. Emily's ears twitched. She knew that sound. Motorcycles. The growl of engines grew louder, and soon, the sound filled the street. The ground beneath Emily's feet even vibrated slightly as the bikes roared closer. Shadow stiffened. Emily could feel it in the way he moved. Just a small change, a tiny shift in his posture. But she knew what it meant. Something wasn't right. A few seconds later, the motorcycle slowed down. The engines rumbled as they came to a stop not too far ahead of her. Emily kept walking, her face calm. She had no reason to react yet. Then boots. Heavy boots scraped against the pavement. Someone got off a bike. Then another. Then another. She could hear them. 4 people. 4 sets of footsteps. 4 men. They weren't just passing by. They were waiting. Emily tightened her grip on Shadow's harness, but she didn't stop walking. She wasn't scared. She had been through things like this before. People sometimes thought she was weak because she couldn't see. But they were the ones who were blind. A voice spoke up, breaking the silence. It was deep and rough, like someone who smoked too many cigarettes. "Hey, lady. Where ya headin'?" Emily kept walking, pretending she didn't hear him. She had learned long ago that answering men like this never helped. Sometimes, they got bored and walked away. Other times, they didn't. She could only hope today was the first kind. But then another voice joined in. Younger. Mocking. "Ah, look at that, she's got a little doggy to protect her." Laughter. Emily didn't react. She just kept moving. Shadow, though, was already reacting. Emily could feel it in him. His muscles were tense. His body was stiff. He was waiting. Watching. Not yet, Shadow, Emily thought. The laughter continued. One of the men stepped forward, boots crunching on the pavement. Emily knew it before it happened. They were going to block her path. And she was right. A wall of warmth. A presence in front of her. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. The leader of the group had stepped in front of her. He was close. Too close. Emily stopped walking. His breath hit her face hot and thick, smelling of cigarettes and bad intentions. "Come on now, don't be rude," he said, his tone fake and playful. "We're just trying to have a little fun." Behind her, one of the others chuckled. Emily sighed. It always happened like this. Emily knew their type. She didn't need to see their faces. She had met men like this before. The kind of men who laughed just a little too loudly at their own jokes. The kind of men who thought being in a group made them strong. The kind of men who thought they could push around anyone they wanted. But the worst kind? The kind that looked for someone weaker than them. Or, at least, someone they thought was weaker. That's why they picked her. A blind woman. Small. Walking alone. Easy. A perfect target. At least, that's what they thought. Emily tightened her grip on Shadow's harness. She had faced men like this before. And she had won. Emily said nothing, but she didn't move, either. She wasn't scared. She was calculating. Listening. She counted their movements. She felt their energy. She listened for the small details. The leader was standing in front of her. Not too close yet, but close enough to stop her from walking forward. The second man was behind her, but not directly. Maybe to her left. The other two? Close, but not sure yet. They were waiting to see what would happen. Waiting for the leader to make the first move. Shadow stood beside her, still as stone. But Emily could feel his silent conversation. His ears were twitching. His tail was low and stiff. His breathing had slowed. All signs of a trained protector. A normal dog might bark. Might panic. Might whimper. But Shadow was not a normal dog. Emily took a deep breath. And waited. The leader sighed loudly, like he was bored. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" he said. Or are you too scared to talk? Behind her, another biker laughed. Emily stayed silent. The leader didn't like that. Men like him hated being ignored. He stepped closer. Just half a step. Emily heard the shift of leather. The jingle of metal chains on his jacket. The deep, scratchy sound of his breathing. He was close now. Close enough for her to smell his cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. Too close. Shadow let out a low, deep growl. The kind of growl that made the air feel heavy. The kind of growl that wasn't a threat, but a promise. The leader stopped moving. "Oh," he said, dragging out the word. "Looks like the little doggy's got some bite, huh?" More laughter. But this time, it wasn't as strong. There was a slight hesitation in their voices. Shadow had changed the game. They had expected an easy target. They hadn't expected him. Emily tilted her head slightly. Then, she finally spoke. Her voice was calm. Steady. Controlled. "I don't want trouble," she said simply. "Just let me pass." Silence. The leader didn't like that, either. "Or what?" he asked, his voice challenging. Emily took a small breath. She could end this now. She could tell them the truth. That Shadow wasn't just a guide dog. That he had been trained for war. That he had taken down people twice their size. That they were making the biggest mistake of their lives. But she didn't. Not yet. Because they weren't ready to believe it. And Emily. She was patient. She had all the time in the world. The bikers just didn't know it yet. The air felt thick now. Like a storm was about to hit. Emily stood still, her face calm, her hand steady on Shadow's harness. The bikers thought they had her trapped. 4 men. Big, strong, laughing like they already won. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Shadow's growl had already made them uneasy. Emily could hear it in their voices, the slight hesitation, the way the laughter wasn't as loud as before. But the leader still wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. And that was his first mistake. The leader took another step closer. Emily didn't move. But she could smell him now. The sharp scent of cheap cologne and old smoke. She could feel the heat of his body in front of her. Too close. Too confident. And then, he reached out. Just a small movement. A hand, grabbing for her arm. A little push. Testing her. Seeing if she would flinch. Emily didn't flinch. But Shadow? He reacted. It happened in a blink. The moment the man's fingers touched Emily's sleeve, Shadow lunged. Not to bite. Not to attack. But to warn. A blur of black fur, muscles tensed like steel wires, teeth flashing just enough to be seen. The man jumped back so fast he nearly tripped. "What the?" His voice was different now. Not mocking. Not confident. Shadow stood in front of Emily, head low, ears pinned back. His growl wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet. Deep. A sound that crawled under your skin and made your heart pound faster. Emily tightened her grip on his harness. Just a little. Not yet, Shadow. Shadow stayed still. Waiting. Watching. He was trained for moments like this. To control. To protect. The other bikers didn't laugh this time. For the first time since they stopped her, they weren't sure anymore. Emily could feel their confusion. Their fear. They were starting to realize something. This wasn't a normal dog. And she wasn't a normal blind woman. The leader forced out a laugh. Too loud. Too forced. Trying to act like he wasn't rattled. Trying to regain control. He looked at his men. Relax, it's just a dog. She's just playing tough. But one of the other bikers wasn't so sure. His voice was lower, almost nervous. "Man, that's not a normal dog." The leader scoffed. "Oh, come on. It's a freakin' Labrador." Emily smiled. "Just a little." And then she spoke. "Is that what you think?" The leader's smirk faltered. "Just for a second." Emily turned her head slightly toward him, as if looking straight at him. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "Do you know what a Navy SEAL canine is?" Silence. For the first time, true silence. No jokes. No mocking. Just four men, standing in the middle of the street, realizing they had messed up. One of the bikers, not the leader, but another one, maybe the youngest, gasped. Emily could hear it. A sharp inhale, like someone putting a puzzle together too late. "No way," he muttered. "No freakin' way." The leader frowned. "What?" The younger man took a shaky step back. "I've heard of him. I've seen that dog before. There was a news story years ago. He's one of them. He was in the military. Special forces. A freakin' SEAL dog." Another biker cursed under his breath. The leader's confidence cracked. Emily could hear it in his breath. The small hitch, the way he shuffled his feet like he wasn't sure if he should move. She smiled again. "Just enough. Do you still think he's just a dog?" Shadow didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't need to. The fear was already spreading. The men weren't looking at Emily anymore. They were looking at Shadow. And Shadow was looking back. For a second, the leader tried to play it cool. He let out a forced laugh. "Whatever. Let's get outta here." But he wasn't fooling anyone. His voice wasn't the same. It wasn't bold anymore. The bikers weren't thinking about harassing Emily now. They were thinking about getting away. Fast. Engines roared. Boots shuffled. Leather jackets creaked as the men rushed to their bikes. Within seconds, they were gone. Emily took a deep breath, letting the street fall silent again. She felt the moment the bikers left. The air was different now. Lighter. Calm again. She reached down and gently stroked Shadow's head. "Good boy." Shadow wagged his tail. "Just a little." Emily smiled. And just like that, she turned and continued walking. Like nothing had happened. Because for her, this was just another day. Another day where someone underestimated the wrong person. Another day where she won. Another day where they learned the truth. And she didn't even have to open her eyes to see it. The bikers laughed loudly. Emily could hear it, all the sneers, the mocking voices, the confidence in their tone. They thought she was weak. They thought she was easy. But they had no idea what was coming. The men didn't leave. Instead, they circled her like wolves, their boots scraping against the pavement. One of them, maybe the boldest or maybe the dumbest, reached out. His fingers brushed against her shoulder. Before Emily could even say a word, Shadow moved. It was like flipping a switch. The dog who had been calm and quiet just seconds ago changed. A deep, low growl rumbled from his chest. It wasn't a normal growl. It was the kind that sent a chill down your spine. The kind that made your body freeze even if you didn't know why. The leader of the bikers stiffened. His body reacted before his brain could catch up. His heart pounded faster. The others hesitated. They had seen dogs before. But not like this one. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He didn't move wildly like some scared pet. No. He was controlled. Focused. His stance shifted. His muscles tensed. His ears perked. His body lowered just slightly, perfectly balanced. Waiting. Calculating. His breathing slowed. Emily felt the energy change. She smiled. Just a little. Not a nervous smile. Not a scared smile. A smile that said you have no idea what you just did. She tilted her head slightly. Her voice was calm. Steady. Unbothered. You really don't want to do that. The man who had touched her snatched his hand back like he had touched fire. One of the younger bikers scoffed, trying to shake off the moment. Yeah? And what's your little puppy gonna do? His voice was full of confidence. Fake confidence. Because even he could feel it. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a dog. Shadow's growl grew louder. Not too loud. Not crazy. Just enough. Enough to make their skin crawl. Enough to make them feel small. Emily didn't move. She just tightened her grip on the harness. Not to hold Shadow back. But to prepare. Because she knew what came next. And they didn't. She took a slow breath, her face still calm. Then, she spoke again. Her words were soft. But they hit like thunder. You ever hear of a Navy SEAL K-9? The leader's smirk faded. Just like that. Gone. A single second ago, he had been laughing. Now. He looked like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over his head. Underscore 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 on. Realization creeps in. What? The leader muttered. The other bikers glanced at each other. Some of them didn't get it. Not yet. So Emily helped them out. That little doggy was trained for combat. She said it slowly, letting each word sink in. He's taken down threats bigger than all of you combined. She heard one of the men swallow hard. The younger one, the one who had laughed first, took a small step back. Just half an inch. Maybe he didn't even know he did it. But Emily heard it. She felt the shift. The tiny crack in their confidence. She let the silence stretch. Then she spoke again. And he's retired now, but old habits die hard. Silence. No more laughter. No more sneers. No more arrogance. It was like someone had pressed pause on the whole world. Emily waited. Because she knew what would happen next. First, the mind catches up. Then, the body reacts. And sure enough, the leader took a tiny step back. Like he didn't even mean to. Like his feet moved on their own. Fear had finally reached him. No way, one of the men whispered. She's lying. But his voice shook. Even he didn't believe what he just said. Then, it happened. The realization. One of the bikers, not the leader, but another one, maybe the smartest, gasped. I've heard of this dog. Emily smiled. There it was. The moment of truth. What are you talking about? The leader snapped. But his voice wasn't as strong now. Not as sure. Not as cocky. The smart one swallowed hard. His voice was lower now. Like he was remembering something important. I saw it on the news. A few years back. He pointed at Shadow. That dog was in the military. Special Forces. Navy SEAL K-9. He took down enemies in combat. Trained for war. One of the best in the world. Someone cursed under their breath. The leader? He didn't say anything. Because he knew. Even if he wanted to deny it. Even if he wanted to pretend he was still in control. He knew. They had made a big mistake. And now, they had a choice. The leader's hands curled into fists. But not to fight. He was angry. Not at Emily. Not even at Shadow. He was angry at himself. For picking the wrong target. For being blind to the truth. And now. Now he had to back down. But he had to do it without looking weak. So he forced out a laugh. It was fake. TCH. Whatever. He shrugged, trying to act cool. This was boring anyway. Emily almost laughed. She had seen this before. The classic tough guy act. But it didn't matter. Because they were already stepping away. Backing off. Running. The game was over. They lost. The bikers didn't say goodbye. They just left. Engines roared back to life. Boots shuffled against the pavement. And just like that, they were gone. Emily let out a slow breath. She reached down and stroked Shadow's head. His tail wagged just a little. She smiled. And without another word, she picked up the harness. And kept walking. Like nothing had ever happened. Because for her, this was just another day. Another day where someone underestimated the wrong person. Another day where she won. The air around them was no longer light. It felt heavy, thick, dangerous. The bikers had started off confident. Laughing. Mocking. Acting like they were in control. But now, they were silent. Shadow's deep growl still echoed in their ears. The realization of who he was had cracked their confidence like a broken mirror. And Emily. She still stood calmly. She wasn't scared. She wasn't nervous. Because she knew. She had already won. But some men just don't know when to stop. The leader of the bikers, his pride wounded, his face red with anger, wasn't ready to walk away so easily. Even as his men fidgeted beside him. Even as they shifted on their feet, looking ready to leave. Even though he knew the smart thing to do was walk away. He couldn't. Because in his mind, walking away meant losing. And he didn't like to lose. So he took a step forward. Shadow didn't move. But his eyes followed. Watching. Waiting. The leader scoffed, forcing out another fake laugh. Navy SEAL dog. Big deal. He's old now, right? Just a retired mutt. Emily didn't answer. She let the words hang in the air. She let the silence stretch. Because silence is powerful. And she knew something he didn't. She knew the moment he tried anything, Shadow would be faster than his own brain. And deep down, the leader? He knew it too. Then, the younger biker, the one who recognized Shadow first, spoke up. His voice wasn't loud anymore. It was cautious. Almost afraid. Man, we should just go. The leader snapped his head toward him. Shut up. His voice was sharp. Too sharp. The younger man swallowed hard. Emily heard the nervousness in his breath. He had figured it out before the others. He knew they weren't in control anymore. The leader clenched his fists. He wanted to prove something. He wanted to test them. He took another step forward, just one. Shadow moved. It was small. But it was enough. A shift in his stance. A lowering of his body. The deep breath of a warrior preparing for battle. Emily felt it. She knew what was about to happen. One more move. One more inch, and Shadow would strike. The leader felt it too. He stopped. Everything stopped. His heart. His breath. Even the air around him. For the first time in a very, very long time, the leader of the bikers felt small. Weak. And he didn't like that. The young biker spoke again. Dude. Let's go. His voice was firmer. More serious. The others nodded quickly, murmuring their agreement. They didn't want this. They didn't want to fight a trained SEAL dog. They didn't want to risk their lives. And neither did the leader. But he had to save face. He had to make it seem like he was walking away by choice. So he snorted, rolling his shoulders back like this was all just a joke. TCH. This ain't worth our time. He turned. But everyone knew the truth. It wasn't his choice. The choice had already been made for him. One by one, the bikers stepped back toward their motorcycles. The leader was last. Even as he climbed onto his bike, Emily could hear the tension in his breath. They had lost. And they all knew it. Engines roared to life. Rubber burned against pavement. And just like that, they were gone, leaving behind only the echo of their own failure. Emily waited. Even after the bikes disappeared, even after the sound faded. She stood still. Listening. Feeling the air. And when she was absolutely sure that the danger was gone, she smiled. She reached down and scratched Shadow's head. Good boy. Shadow wagged his tail once. Just once. Because he had known, too. This wasn't a fight. It was a lesson. And the bikers? They had learned the hard way. Emily walks away. Emily adjusted her sunglasses. She picked up Shadow's harness. And then, she did what she always did. She kept walking. Like nothing had ever happened. Because for her, this was just another day. Another day where someone underestimated the wrong person. Another day where someone learned the truth. Another day where she and Shadow won without even trying. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone thinks is weak. The street was quiet. Too quiet. The bikers were no longer laughing. No more jokes, no more sneering. The tension in the air was thick. Heavy. Like the calm before a storm. Shadow stood still beside Emily. His body was like a coiled spring, ready to explode into action at any second. His ears were forward, his eyes locked onto the men in front of them. The bikers were still trying to act tough. Trying to pretend they weren't scared. But Emily could hear it. The small shifts in their breathing. The uneasy scuffing of their boots. The way their hands twitched like they weren't sure what to do next. They were hesitating. They were reconsidering. And for the first time since they stopped her, they weren't in control anymore. But then, one of them made a mistake. A big mistake. One of the bikers, the cockiest of the bunch, still wasn't convinced. Maybe he thought Emily was bluffing. Maybe he thought he could still win. Or maybe he just didn't know when to quit. So, he reached for her. Again. His fingers barely brushed against her arm. And then, it happened. In a blur of black fur, muscle, and raw power, Shadow moved. Fast. Faster than anyone expected. The biker didn't even see him coming. 1 second, he was reaching. The next, he was flat on his back. Bam. The man hit the ground hard, his head slamming against the pavement. His sunglasses flew off, skidding across the sidewalk. His breath caught in his throat. Because Shadow was on top of him. Teeth bared. Eyes locked. Breathing slow. Controlled. He didn't bite. He didn't have to. Because this was worse. Everything stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The other bikers stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. They had seen fights before. They had seen dogs before. But they had never seen this. Because this wasn't a pet. This wasn't some random guide dog. This was something else. Something they weren't ready for. Something deadly. Shadow stood over the fallen man. His paws pressed against his chest. His teeth sharp, strong, dangerous, were just inches from the man's face. But he didn't bite. Didn't snarl. Didn't need to. Because his presence alone was enough. The man on the ground knew it. His hands shook. His breath came in short gasps. He wanted to move but he didn't dare. Because if he did the wrong thing, Shadow would finish it. The leader of the bikers, the man who had been so bold, so full of himself just minutes ago. Lost it? His face turned pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His hands trembled at his sides. He took a small, shaky step back. Then another. Then he broke. His voice was barely above a whisper. Let's get out of here. He didn't shout it. Didn't command it. Because he wasn't in charge anymore. Shadow was. The other bikers didn't argue. They were already moving. Scrambling. Running. One by one, they stumbled toward their bikes, hands shaking as they grabbed their helmets. Their boots pounded against the pavement as they climbed on. Engines roared. Tires screeched. And then they were gone. Speeding away like they were being chased by a ghost. They didn't even wait for their fallen friend. They just left him there. The man still on the ground blinked up at the sky. Dazed. Breathless. Terrified. His hands twitched at his sides, like he wasn't sure what to do. Then, slowly, carefully, he turned his head. And met Shadow's eyes. Those deep, brown, unblinking eyes. Eyes that had seen battle. Eyes that had seen things this man could never imagine. Eyes that said, if I wanted to, I could end this right now. The man swallowed hard. He got the message. He wasn't in charge anymore. He was just lucky to still be breathing. Then, Emily did something strange. Something the man didn't expect. She knelt down. And with a soft, gentle voice, she patted Shadow's head. Good boy. Shadow's tail wagged. Just once. Then, slowly, he stepped back. Not because he had to. But because he chose to. Because his job was done. Because he had already won. The man on the ground scrambled to his feet. Didn't say a word. Didn't look back. He just ran. Emily adjusted her sunglasses. Picked up Shadow's harness. And without another word, another glance, another moment wasted, she kept walking. Like nothing had ever happened. Because for her, this was just another day. Another day where someone underestimated the wrong person. Another day where they learned the truth. Another day where she won. Without even breaking a sweat. The street was frozen in silence. No more laughter. No more mocking voices. The air was thick, heavy, charged with tension. Shadow stood still, his paws planted firmly on the chest of the biker lying flat on the pavement. The man's sunglasses were gone, his mouth slightly open in shock, his breath coming in short, shaky gasps. The other bikers weren't moving. They couldn't. They had come looking for weakness. But what they had found was something else entirely. And now, they were trapped. The leader of the bikers forced himself to breathe. His mouth was dry. His hands were shaking at his sides. His body wanted to run. But his mind was still catching up. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. This wasn't how it worked. They were the predators. They were the ones who chose the weak. But somehow, they had become the prey. And Emily. She still hadn't moved. She still hadn't even raised her voice. She had done nothing at all. And yet, she had already won. The man underneath Shadow gulped. His whole body was frozen stiff. He just knew if he made one wrong move, it would be over. Because this wasn't a normal dog. This was something else. This dog had seen things. This dog had done things. And now, he was staring straight into its eyes. Deep, unblinking, cold eyes. Not angry. Not wild. Just calculating. Measuring. deciding. And that was somehow worse. Because a dog that doesn't bark before it bites? That's a dog you never, ever want to mess with. The leader took another step back. He thought no one noticed. But Emily did. And so did his men. The crack in his confidence was spreading. And then, the youngest biker, the one who had first recognized Shadow, spoke up again. His voice was quiet. Careful. Afraid. Dude, we have to go. His words broke something. Like the first stone falling from a dam. Because now, the others were shifting too. Their feet moved. Their hands twitched. Their breathing turned shaky. They weren't acting tough anymore. They weren't thinking about fighting. They were thinking about escaping. The leader heard them. He felt the change. But he didn't want to accept it. Because if he did, it meant he had lost. And he had never lost before. His jaw clenched. His fists curled. He wanted to do something. Say something. Anything to take back control. But what could he say? What could he do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because this wasn't a game anymore. This was real. And if he made one wrong choice, he wouldn't walk away from it. Shadow hadn't moved. But his growl was still low and steady. His breath was controlled. His body solid. He was waiting. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Because a normal dog would have attacked already. But Shadow was different. Shadow was a weapon. A trained warrior. And warriors don't attack without reason. They wait. They give a chance. But if that chance is wasted, then they finish the job. The leader let out a shaky breath. He wasn't in charge anymore. Emily was. Her dog was. He swallowed, trying to save face. He needed a way out. A way to walk away without looking weak. So he forced a laugh. TCH. This isn't even worth it? His voice cracked just a little. He hoped no one noticed. But they did. Everyone did. Especially Emily. And that made her smile. Just a little. Because she had seen this exact moment before. The moment when bullies realize they aren't the strongest one in the room. The moment they know they lost. The moment fear replaces their pride. And now, the leader of the bikers was living in that moment. And he hated it. One by one, the bikers backed away. One by one, they turned toward their bikes. One by one, they chose survival over pride. Boots scraped against the pavement. Hands fumbled with helmets. Engines roared back to life. And then, they were gone. Vanishing down the road. Leaving behind only their fear. And their failure. But the man on the ground? He was still there. Still frozen. Still trapped under the weight of the thing he had underestimated. Shadow's deep brown eyes locked onto his. Silent. Unmoving. Waiting. The man's hands twitched. His breath hitched. His body screamed, "Run!" But his mind refused to move. Because he knew. He just knew. That if he moved too fast. If he moved the wrong way. Shadow wouldn't let him go. And then. Emily finally spoke. Her voice was soft. Calm. Controlled. Shadow. Just one word. But it was everything. Shadow immediately stepped back. Not because he was done. But because Emily had decided it was over. Because she was in control. Not him. Not the bikers. Not even the situation. Only her. And Shadow knew it. The man on the ground blinked. His brain screamed, "Go." And he did. Scrambling to his feet. Running. He didn't stop. Didn't look back. Didn't even try to act tough. Because he couldn't. Because he had nothing left. He was just grateful to still be breathing. And then he was gone. Emily adjusted her sunglasses, picked up Shadow's harness, and without another word, another glance, another moment wasted, she kept walking, like nothing had ever happened. Because for her, this was just another day. Another day where someone underestimated the wrong person. Another day where someone learned the truth. Another day where she won, without even breaking a sweat. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone thinks is weak. The dust settled. The street was quiet again. The roaring engines of the bikers' motorcycles had faded into the distance. The only sounds now were the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant chatter of birds, and the slow, steady breathing of Shadow, standing proudly beside Emily. The fight was over. And everyone knew who had won. Emily straightened her back, adjusting her sunglasses as if nothing had happened. To her, this was just another day. But to the people around her, it was a moment they would never forget. She could feel their eyes on her. Even without seeing them, she knew. People had been watching. People had seen everything. And now, they didn't know what to say. A heavy silence hung in the air. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a shocked silence. A silence full of awe. A silence full of realization. And then, finally, someone spoke. A man's voice broke through the stillness. His tone was filled with pure disbelief. "Lady, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen." Emily smiled. Just a little. Because she had heard that exact same sentence before. Many times. She gave a small nod, as if to say, "I know." Then, she turned toward Shadow. "Let's go, buddy. I think we've made our point." Shadow let out a soft huff, his tail wagging just once. And with that, she walked away. Her guide dog leading the way. Leaving behind a lesson that no one in that town would ever forget. Emily wasn't interested in what people said after she left. She didn't need to hear it. Because she already knew. She had seen it all before. But if she had stayed, if she had listened, this is what she would have heard. A woman gasping, hand over her heart. A teenage boy whispering to his friend, eyes wide. "Did you see that? Did you see how fast that dog moved?" A mother, holding her child's hand, shaking her head in amazement. An older man, chuckling under his breath. Now that was something special. A group of workers standing near a shop window, muttering to each other. "I thought she was just some blind lady, but she just took down 4 bikers without even lifting a finger." And then, a deep voice, firm, full of respect. "That wasn't just any dog." Silence. Someone asked, "What do you mean?" And then the answer came. Low. Serious. Like a secret being told. "That was a Navy SEAL K9. That dog used to be in the military. That dog was trained for war." A gasp. "No way. I'm serious." More whispers. More shocked faces. Because now, the truth was out. By the time Emily reached the end of the street, the rumors had already started. Some were true. Some were exaggerated. And some were just plain wild. "I heard that dog used to take down bad guys in the war. I heard he was on secret missions. I heard he can smell danger before it even happens. I heard he once fought off an entire gang by himself. And then, the wildest one of all. I heard he can take down a man before he even blinks." People laughed. People whispered. People remembered. And just like that, a legend was born. Somewhere in a dark alley, a group of bikers sat in silence. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking anyone. They weren't acting tough. They were just thinking. The leader sat with his hands clenched into fists. His face was red. But not with anger. With shame. One of his men finally spoke. "Dude, what the heck was that?" No one answered. Because no one knew. All they knew was that they had made a mistake. A big mistake. And now, they would never make it again. Because if there was one thing they had learned today, it was this. Never underestimate the quiet ones. And never ever mess with a Navy SEAL K9. Emily didn't need to hear any of it. She didn't need to know what people were saying. She didn't need to see their faces. Because she already knew. She knew that from now on, people would think twice before messing with her. Not because she was blind. Not because she had a dog. But because of who she was. And because of who Shadow was. And that was more than enough. Emily walked a little further before stopping at a small bench in the park. She sat down, stretching her legs out, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin. Shadow sat beside her, ears still perked, still alert. But now, he was calmer. Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out a small treat. She held it out to him. "You earned this, buddy." Shadow sniffed the treat, then gently took it from her hand. His tail wagged twice this time. A small reward for a job well done. As she sat there, listening to the distant sounds of the town, she smiled. Because she knew. Tomorrow would be just another day. More walking. More people. More moments like this. And maybe, just maybe, another fool who thought he could push her around. If that day ever came, she would be ready. And so would Shadow. Because some battles are won without ever needing to fight. And that was a lesson she would never forget. The aftermath, silence speaks louder than words. The street was quiet now. No more growling engines. No more laughter. The bikers were gone. But their fear remained. Emily stood tall, adjusting her sunglasses like nothing had happened. To her, this was just another day. But to the people who had watched, it was a moment they would never forget. A woman standing nearby gasped, her hand pressed over her mouth. A man, probably in his 40s, chuckled under his breath. And then, someone finally spoke. His voice broke the silence like thunder. "Lady, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen." Emily smiled just a little. She wasn't one for showing off. She didn't need applause. She didn't need praise. She just wanted to walk in peace. She gave a small nod, then turned to Shadow. She reached down and patted his head. "Let's go, buddy. I think we've made our point." And with that, she walked away. Shadow led the way, his steps calm, steady, and full of purpose. Behind them, the town buzzed with whispers. Emily didn't turn around. She didn't need to. But if she had stood there just a little longer, she would have heard something interesting. Because now, the people in town were talking. And word was spreading fast. A teenager, still wide-eyed, turned to his friend. "Did you see that? Did you see how fast that dog moved?" A young mother shook her head in disbelief. "I thought she was just an ordinary blind woman." An older man, probably someone who had seen a lot in his years, muttered, "That wasn't just any dog." Another person, a worker standing outside a shop, rubbed his chin. "I swear I've heard of that dog before, but where?" Then, the whispers started. "She said the dog was a Navy SEAL K9. "No way, you think that's true?" "Man, did you see the way those bikers ran?" "I believe it. I heard military dogs are trained to fight, to take down enemies." "Well, he sure took down that guy." The laughter was different now. Before, the bikers had laughed out of arrogance. Now, people laughed in pure amazement. While the town talked about Emily, the bikers were hiding. They had stopped at a rundown gas station, miles away from the scene. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking anyone. They were shaken. The leader sat on his motorcycle, gripping the handle so tight his knuckles turned white. One of his men, the one Shadow had knocked down, leaned against a wall, still catching his breath. The youngest biker, the one who had known the truth first, looked at the others. His voice was quiet. "Guys, we messed up bad." The leader growled, trying to act tough. "Shut up." But no one listened. Because the truth was, they all knew. They had picked the wrong person to mess with. And now, they would never forget it. Emily reached a small park at the end of the street. She sat down on a bench, stretching her legs, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. Shadow sat beside her, still alert, still watching. But now, he was calm again. Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out a treat. She held it in front of him. "You earned this, buddy." Shadow sniffed it once, then took it gently from her hand. His tail wagged twice. A small reward for a job well done. By the next morning, the story had already spread. People talked about it at the grocery store, at the coffee shop, at the bus stop. "Did you hear about the blind woman and her dog?" "Yeah. I heard they took down 4 bikers. I heard that dog is a trained military dog. I heard he used to work with Navy SEALs. I heard he can sense danger before it happens." Each time the story was told, it got bigger. More dramatic. More legendary. Some of it was true. Some of it was exaggerated. And some of it was just plain wild. "I heard that dog once took down an entire gang by himself." Emily would have laughed if she heard that one. But she didn't. Because she didn't need to hear it. She already knew the truth. And so did Shadow. For most people, this was just another day. But for the bikers? For the people who watched? For the entire town? This was a lesson. One they would never forget. They learned that fire strength doesn't always look the way you expect. Fire silence can be more powerful than words. Fire the strongest people are often the ones no one notices. Fire, and sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the room, is the thing everyone thinks is weak. From that day on, no one ever underestimated Emily Carter again. And no one ever forgot the name Shadow. Because legends never die. Would you have expected that twist? Let me know in the comments. And remember, never judge someone by what you think they can do. You just might be in for a surprise. Emily walked slowly through the park, Shadow leading the way. Everything felt normal again. The sun was warm on her skin. The soft rustle of leaves whispered in the breeze. Birds chirped from the trees, singing their usual morning song. If someone had seen her right then, just a woman walking with her guide dog, they would have never guessed what had happened the day before. They would have never known about the bikers. They would have never imagined that, just 24 hours ago, those men had been taught a lesson they would never forget. And that was the beauty of it. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it moves in silence. Until it's needed. The town was awake now. Shops were opening. People were stepping out of their houses, starting their daily routines. A few of them noticed Emily walking by. Some whispered. Some just watched with quiet respect. And a few gave her a small nod. Not because they pitied her. Not because they thought she needed help. But because they knew. They knew who she was. They knew what had happened. And they knew that no one would ever mess with her again. Meanwhile, miles away from town, the bikers were still trying to forget. But they couldn't. They sat in their usual hangout, an old rundown diner on the side of the highway. The leader stared at his cup of coffee, his fingers tapping against the table. No one spoke. No one laughed. The man Shadow had knocked down still felt the weight of the dog's paws on his chest. Still saw those cold, trained eyes staring him down. Still heard that low, deep growl. He swallowed hard, staring at the table. The youngest biker finally spoke. His voice was small. "So, what now?" No one answered. Because no one knew. All they knew was that they had lost. And the worst part? They never even saw it coming. Emily didn't need to know what they were thinking. She didn't need to know what they were saying. She already knew. She had seen it happen before. She had met people like them before. People who thought power came from size. From numbers. From fear. But real power? Real power comes from something else. Something quieter. Something stronger. Something that doesn't need to be loud. Because when the time comes, it speaks for itself. From that day forward, the town changed. People walked a little taller. Spoke with a little more confidence. Because if Emily could stand her ground, then so could they. They learned that fire strength isn't about how loud you are. Fire, it's about knowing who you are and standing firm. Fire, it's about choosing when to fight and when to walk away. Fire, and sometimes, the strongest thing you can do, is let people underestimate you. Because when the time comes, they'll never see you coming. Shadow didn't need a medal. Didn't need people to cheer his name. Didn't need to be praised. He just did his job. He protected Emily. He showed those men exactly what he was capable of. And now, he was just a dog again. His tail wagged as he walked beside Emily, his paws tapping gently against the sidewalk. The sun was rising higher now. A new day. A fresh start. And Shadow? Shadow was ready. For whatever came next. Emily's strength didn't come from her eyesight. Didn't come from her size. Didn't come from fighting. Her strength came from knowing who she was. From trusting herself. From trusting Shadow. And the world didn't see it coming. Because the world didn't think someone like her could be powerful. But power doesn't always look like you expect. Sometimes, it looks like a blind woman walking quietly down the street. Sometimes, it looks like a black Labrador standing calmly by her side. And sometimes, it looks like the moment someone realizes they messed with the wrong person. The people in that town would always remember Emily Carter. Not because she was blind. Not because she had a dog. But because of what she taught them. Fire never assumes someone is weak just because they look different. Fire never judge someone by what you think they can do. Fire, because sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones you should fear the most. The world will always have people like those bikers. Bullies. People who think they are the strongest. People who laugh at those they think are weaker. But those people? They never win. Because true power is patient. True power is silent. True power waits for the right moment. And when it finally moves, it changes everything. Life went back to normal in the town. Or at least, it seemed like it did. Shops opened. People walked through the streets. Cars moved along the road, just like they always did. But something was different. Something had changed. People walked a little taller. They spoke with a little more confidence. And most importantly, they remembered. They remembered Emily Carter. They remembered Shadow. They remembered the lesson they had learned. Because in that single moment when 4 bikers ran away in fear, when a small blind woman stood her ground, when a dog proved that true power is silent, the town changed. And it would never be the same again. Emily didn't wake up the next day feeling like a hero. She didn't need people to tell her she was strong. She had always known. She had been strong long before this moment. Because strength isn't just about fighting. Strength isn't about being bigger. Strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. Strength is about knowing who you are. And never letting anyone tell you otherwise. Emily had spent her whole life hearing people doubt her. How can you live alone? How do you walk without help? Aren't you scared? She had heard it all. But she never let it define her. She never let the world decide what she was capable of. Because she knew. And that was all that mattered. Shadow didn't know he was a legend now. He didn't know that people were whispering about him in the streets. Didn't know that kids were talking about him at school. Didn't know that people were looking at Emily a little differently now, not with pity, but with respect. All he knew was that he had done his job. And he would do it again and again, as long as Emily needed him. Because that's what warriors do. They don't ask for fame. They don't demand attention. They don't care if the world sees them. They just protect. And Shadow was the best of them all. Meanwhile, miles away, the bikers were still haunted by what had happened. They hadn't laughed since. Hadn't joked. Hadn't even spoken much. Because they couldn't forget. The leader sat in the corner of a bar, staring at his drink. His hands weren't steady anymore. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Shadow's teeth. He heard that low, deadly growl. And worst of all, he felt something he had never felt before. Helplessness. He had always been the strongest. The toughest. The one people feared. But now he was the one afraid. Because he knew. Somewhere out there was a small blind woman with a dog. And if he ever crossed her path again, he wouldn't stand a chance. Days passed. Then weeks. The story never really died down. But Emily. She just kept living. She walked her usual routes. Went to her favorite coffee shop. Enjoyed her mornings in the park. And to anyone watching, she was just a normal woman. But they knew better now. They knew that appearances can be deceiving. That true power doesn't always look like you expect. That sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one you never see coming. If there was one thing Emily wished people would take away from this moment, it was this. Fire never assumes someone is weak just because they look different. Fire never judge someone by what you think they can do. Fire because sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones you should fear the most. The world is full of people who doubt others. People who think that if someone is smaller, or quieter, or blind, or different in any way, that person must be less. But they aren't. They never were. Because strength doesn't come from size. It doesn't come from being the loudest. It comes from something deeper. Something that can't be measured. And that's the kind of strength that wins battles without even fighting. One evening, about a month later, Emily took her usual walk through town. It was just like any other day. Shadow walked beside her, his steps calm and sure. Emily smiled, listening to the world around her. And then she heard it. A whisper. From a group of teenagers sitting on a bench. One of them pointed at her. That's her. That's the lady with the dog. Another kid nodded, his eyes wide. Dude, she's a total legend. Emily didn't say anything. She didn't even turn her head. She just kept walking. Because she didn't need to hear it. She didn't need the world to see her strength. She already knew who she was. And that was enough. Shadow glanced over his shoulder at the group of kids. His ears twitched. Then, as if he understood everything, he let out a soft huff. And walked on. Because his job wasn't to impress people. His job was to protect. And in that moment, he knew. Emily didn't need protection. She was already stronger than the world could ever know.